Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
If I were to make the statement that team training, educating your staff, is important, I don't think I'd run into a lot of pushback on that. I think I'd gain pretty broad agreement. Beyond improving somebody's individual job performance in the form of increased productivity, efficiency, and morale, as an aggregate, if you have a trained team, it improves the overall practice productivity, efficiency, and profitability. So if that's the case, we all agree this is extremely important to train our staff. Why is it such a huge problem in the dental industry? Well, that's what I want to talk about in this week's episode of Dental Business RX. And more importantly, I want to get into what do you do to fix it? How can you implement efficient training in your practice? My name is Jeff Bloomberg, and I'm your host. And while practices are going to have individualized reasons that might be sabotaging their training program, what we found is there's four major problems that offices run into that prevent them from implementing effective team training. So what I figured I'd do with this episode, I'm going to keep it real brief and to the point, is I'm just going to run through these things and what you do to fix them. So let's start off with our first point, which is no one's responsible or it's something that's not taken very seriously. If you go to a larger corporation, the idea of training, onboarding, ways to educate the staff to bring them up the line, so to speak, into being productive is taken very seriously. They have whole departments allocated for it. Now, how do you transpose that into a smaller business? Because you might go, well, I'm not, a big corporation. I'm not Google. How am I going to train my staff? That isn't the point. Someone ultimately has to be responsible for it, and someone has to take it seriously. And here's the main reason why. I mean, beyond increasing productivity, look, you have a certain number of staff now. Staff turnover is something that everybody is going to face at some point in time. Like if you look at all the faces in your staff meeting and you're going to be practicing for the next 20 years, I don't know that you'll be looking at those same faces 20 years from now. And it's not to say that, the staff are bad or whatever, but people's lives change. They move to other states. They decide they want to do something else. People's lives change. So if you're not planning for this idea or potential rather for turnover, you're going to get yourself into trouble. And if you look at the damage associated with turnover, what is the major damage? And I don't mean turning over an employee who's not productive. I mean, let's say you have a real productive treatment coordinator and they've decided, the treatment coordinator and their spouse have decided to relocate to another state. Well, they've been with you for 8 or 9 years. So when you lose that treatment coordinator, even when you bring that new person in to take that position, right? You lose all that experiential track, that time they've been in your practice, all the little problems they've solved over time, and they're sort of on the same page with you as to how to solve them. Plus, all the work that they've done to become good at their job. That goes out the window, right? Just handing them a treatment coordinator manual doesn't necessarily solve it, right? There's a lot of things this person has overcome to become good at their job. So if you're not planning for those things so that there's always going to be a degree of drop off, okay? But if you're not planning for these things so that you can smoothly bring another employee in, which is, training and apprenticeship, you're going to have issues. You're going to have problems. So this is something you have to take seriously because you might say, well, look, I'm busy. Especially now, it's tougher to be fully staffed. I'm busy. I don't have time for this or whatever. I hate to sound cliche, but it's something that you have to have time for. You have to build it in. And I'll talk about that as I get to my next point here. But you have to take this seriously. Training has to be, just like there are various components of your practice that are important, like scheduling and collecting money, having the ability to train new staff is a function that has to be represented in your business. So that's the first thing. The second issue that I see, mentioned more often than not when it comes to training staff is I don't have the time. Or I can't allocate the time. When am I going to have them train? They're working all the time. Here's all I'd say about that. This whole idea of time is really funny. We'll get a new client, and this new client is working 6 days a week, and they're collecting, $55,000 a month. They're working Monday through Saturday, collecting $55,000 a month. They're working 4 evenings a week. And, a lot of the time spent in their practice, they're not very productive. But in their mind, maybe the practice is only 3 or 4 years old. This is what you have to do if you want to have a productive office. I have to be there all the time. Well, we know that that's not true, especially if you're in a position where you're working 30 or 32 hours a week. This is not true. It's an attitude, like the idea that I have to sit and wait by the phone till people call me so that I can be productive. It's an attitude, and it's actually not lending itself to being any more productive. And it's not uncommon to see that client working 6 days a week go down to working 3 or 4 days a week. I could sit here rattling off examples of this. I don't know how many clients I've seen coming in who are working 4 days a week. Maybe they're collecting $95,000 a month. I can think of one in particular. And then all of a sudden, after a year, they do all their training and they're now collecting close to $200,000 a month and they're working 3 days a week, right? Because that's the question we get asked often. How am I going to allocate all this time to come do my training at MGE? Well, it ends up working itself out because it's really not about time. All right. It's not about time. It's how effective you are with the time that you have. As a dentist, you can think with this in how a schedule is structured. I could schedule you linearly, 1 crown every hour, right? Or every hour and a half. Or I could double book you and give you an assistant. Well, the same number of hours in the day have, passed, but you've been able to generate more productivity in less time. So it's how you use that time. So this is where you have to look at it from this perspective. And I'll give you kind of a stupid example. Let's say, my outlet on my wall isn't working and there's some type of wiring problem in the wall. Well, I'm not an electrician. They'll let me put the strike plate on or the cover plate on a plug, but that's about as far as it goes. Okay, folks? I can connect wires, but I'm not an electrician. So you say, Jeff, fix this plug. All right, well, I don't know what I'm doing. It's going to take me hours to fix it. There's a good chance I could die by getting electrocuted as I go through this, or you could bring in a licensed electrician and it's fixed in 20 minutes, assuming the fuse wasn't tripped. Okay? So the point being is that knowledge and knowing how to do something correctly is going to make me a heck of a lot more efficient and be a lot more effective. So it's not the amount of time that you spend. It's the time. It's how you spend that time. I'll give you one more example. I remember talking to a client probably about 6 years ago. And his office, the practice hours, it was a bigger practice, were 40 hours a week. It was 40 patient hours a week. So obviously, if an employee was working all 40 of those patient hours, that wouldn't be real because you have to get there before and after. So this created a bit of, sort of like a shift system in their schedule, meaning you'd have certain employees who weren't there at certain times and others who were, in order to have enough coverage for what was going on in the office. Well, the first thing is the way the schedule was structured, they had enough chairs for this. They didn't need to be there 5 days a week. They could get it all done in 4. So what I did was, the most important thing in my view is having the entire team there at the same time, because that's how a team works, right? It doesn't work if somebody's here at this time and someone is here at that time and they're not there. The team has to be on the same page and at the same time. So I had them cut down to 4 days a week. Had everybody in the practice, like the whole place was staffed properly all 4 days, and they were more productive working 1 day less per week. They had the chair space for it. There was no reason to be open 5 days. So it wasn't how much time they were there. It was how they used that time. All right? So if I'm your treatment coordinator and you get me trained on how to, let's say, handle patient objections when it comes to paying, and I get trained on this, and it's not just a matter of reading a manual or watching a video. I have to practice a little bit. But let's say I practice it and I'm confident of it. Well, all right, the people you had me seeing before I received this training, let's say 50% of them I couldn't close because I couldn't handle those objections. Well, now that I've learned what to do, assuming that what you're teaching me is effective, now I can close, 80% of them. So that 30% I was losing, I was only at 50%, now I'm at 80, you're now recovering. Let's say it took me 4 or 5 hours to do that training, and you paid me $25 an hour while I was doing it. So you spent, $150, $125, $150 to train me. But then the first case I close, you make an additional $2,000, and that performance continues from that point. So you could sit there and look, well, everybody's busy. I don't have time to do this. Or you could actually invest time for me to learn what I need to learn, and I will be more effective for you at the other side of that training. So this is something that you want to look at in the office. You have to make time for this. And this is something where you might feel like you're going out on a bit of a limb. It's a little bit of a leap here, right? Okay, so I'm going to carve out time where I'm going to train the staff and we'll see what happens. Fine. I can tell you, assuming what you're training people on actually gets a result, that's the most important thing too. It's a matter of what are you getting trained on. You will see the benefit from this. Usually what we recommend clients do is carve out, because there's a couple different types, which I'll talk about when I get to my next point as far as, training issues. But there'll be individualized training and there'll be team training, right? So if there's individualized training, let's say I'm studying on an online platform, like for instance, not to promote something, but I'll just throw it in there. We have our online platform, DDS Success, which has a lot of training for the doctor and the staff on there. For instance, there's positional training. So if I'm a schedule coordinator, there's a whole schedule coordinator course, right? So let's say you go, okay, Jeff, you're the schedule coordinator. You're going to spend an hour and a half a week training, or 3 hours a week training while you're learning what it is you're supposed to learn, or 4 hours. So I spend an hour a day on this, and you pick the time of day that I should do it. Maybe it's the slower part of the day or whatever, because you have to pay me for the time that I'm training. And then I come in and I study these things for an hour, and I become better and better. And then, I study the next thing and so on. You carve that time out of my schedule. And then whoever's responsible in the practice for making sure training occurs, which might be the office manager, which is probably the best place to put that. The office manager makes sure that I actually show up and sit and actually do my training. Ideally, you don't want me doing it with my cell phone at hand, or, I wouldn't have front desk staff training at the front desk during patient hours. I would have them maybe go off to the lounge. They have their tablet and they're studying a or their book, whatever it is that they're reading, and they're off doing that at a separate place rather than at the front, or I'm never going to get any training done. So there's individualized training like that you carve time out for. You could also carve out time for team training. I'll talk about what you could do during the team training in a second, but you might have it where, on Tuesday mornings, the patients start at 10 o'clock, but training starts at 8, and everybody's there, and you have some, food, and everybody eats a muffin or whatever, and then you get into whatever training session that you're going to get into. It also, when you do team training like that, it builds camaraderie. And this is something that, look, you're not going to know if it's going to work for you until you try it. I highly recommend it because beyond building camaraderie, it gets everybody thinking the same way. All right. For instance, let's say we're doing a whole training session on how we're supposed to handle a new patient in the practice. Well, if I'm watching what you expect the hygienist to do, let's say I'm the treatment coordinator, and I'm watching it, say it's a new patient initial and your hygienist sees these, I'm watching what you're telling the hygienist they're supposed to do. Well, then I know what they're supposed to do, and then they know what I'm supposed to do once you talk about what the treatment coordinator is supposed to do. That's part of being a team. We're all on the same page. I have an idea of what their role is. They have an idea of what my role is. I have an idea of what outcome they're supposed to create. They have an idea of what outcome I'm supposed to create. It actually binds the team together all that much more. So you have to make time. So, point one was nobody's taking it serious or responsible. Well, number one, someone has to be ultimately responsible for this. And number two, you have to allocate time for this. And it doesn't have to be a ton of time, but you have to start allocating some time. Point number three is, what are we training the staff on? What's the training methodology? What material am I using? What sequence should I train them in? Well, I'll give you a generalized guideline here. So let's take any position in your dental practice. What is it that the person on that position has to know? Let's look at their general areas of knowledge. They'd first have to They'd first have to have general knowledge about what it means to be an employee in that practice. Because, I have a specific job you've assigned me to, treatment coordinator, financial coordinator, but then I also have the job as, team member of Acme Dental. Because there's certain things about being a team member that are important to know beyond the basic stuff, when pay is, what vacation policy is. Yeah, sure, I have to know all that, but also maybe how you want us all represented in the community. I'm an ambassador for the practice, right? Maybe, our overall attitude when it comes to customer service and how important it is. These are sort of policies that dictate how every staff member is supposed to conduct themselves as a staff member, right? That's point one. The second area of knowledge that I'd have to be trained on would be how to do my job. So if I'm a financial coordinator, I'd have to understand insurance. I'd have to understand your software. I'd have to understand the procedures in your practice, how you want things done. I'd have to understand the office's financial policy, when I'm supposed to send out statements, and so on, so that I could actually perform the duties of the job. From there, assuming somebody has those two basic points in, I know what it means to be a staff member, and I know how to do the job that you've assigned me to, all right? I then would have to know, and part of it, by the way, knowing how to do the job that you've assigned me to includes how to manage my job. That's important. Not just the skills of the job, but how you want this job managed so that it actually performs the way it's supposed to. But assuming I know those two things, what would you train me on next? Well, there you would train me on maybe additional skills related to my job. So let's say I'm a treatment coordinator and you've trained me what it means to be an employee in your practice. You've trained me on the basics of being a treatment coordinator. Well, what skills could I improve that would improve my overall job performance? Well, you could have me get trained on how to communicate better, maybe how to provide better customer service, as well as how to sell. If I'm a treatment coordinator, I should really know how to sell. Well, I don't have to be, an expertly trained salesperson to have the basic knowledge of how to do the treatment coordinator job. But the more you train me on how to sell, the better I'm going to be at doing the treatment coordinator job. You could do this for any position. You could have a dental assistant, and maybe they have the basic requirements in place in your practice to be a dental assistant, but then there might be other beyond customer service and communication, which would also be important for a dental assistant. That would be something you'd want to train me on. But then there are other things, maybe different courses I can do or certifications I can do so that I can perform other things in the practice. Do you see? So that's sort of the training program for each employee in your practice. You first look at, okay, how do I turn them into an employee? And then how do I turn them into this job? And then what additional skills would I want them to have so that they can become better and better and better at that job? And it doesn't take long to figure this out, right? You sort of lay it out and you start working with it, and then you start putting people through it. And the only thing I'll say about this, because I know when I mention this to somebody, usually the points they stick on is, well, I don't really have a good employee manual. I don't have a good manual for different positions. This is really a case where something is better than nothing. I've said this before, but when it comes to training people, having something, even a job description, is better than no job description. When I talk about generating policy for a practice, I usually get this sort of, the blank look you get on a patient's face when you mention a dental term that they're not familiar with. You mentioned that the problem is on the distal surface of their tooth, and you get that sort of blank look in their eyes for a second. They have no idea what you just said, and you maybe slipped up and you didn't mean to say that. And then you ask them, did you understand what I said? Of course they say, oh yeah, all makes sense, which they have no clue what you just said. But I'll mention that you need to have policies in your practice or manuals that are, up to date and really reflect what's happening. I'll get that same blank look when I tell a newer client this. Because I get this concept that they're thinking of, that they're going to have these books that they're going to have to write, and they're not good at writing, and how is this going to work? And look, it's really not that bad, folks. If you want to start generating policy for your practice, number one, it doesn't have to be, high-end literature. It's instructions, okay? And they should be very simple. And some policy is better than no policy. I keep saying that, but, and this is an experiment you can do for yourself. Take something that's really been irritating you in your business, right? Maybe how financial arrangements are made. Let's say financial arrangements are made very poorly in your business, or your practice rather. And you go, okay, well, do I have any policy on this, how I want financial arrangements made? And you look and you go, no, I don't. All right, well then generate one. And as long as it's sensical, people should follow it. You generate one. Doesn't need it just written, print it off. The only thing I'd recommend is have one centralized place. You keep all the soft copies of this, like on your server or whatever, so that you can find it, and have people read it, maybe discuss it at a staff meeting, and have people start doing it. And you'd be surprised. Now that's handled. You don't have to think about that anymore. It's a done deal, right? That's how you start. But then that's one policy in the books. And then write another one next week. At the end of the year, you have 50 policies, folks. So this is something that I recommend everybody do, because it's really the case of where something is better than nothing, right? And as time goes on, you'll generate more and more and more. The only thing I'll mention is, and this is very important, is any policy written for your dental practice. Anybody can suggest a policy. That's okay. Your office manager, dental assistant, whomever can suggest and even write a policy. That's fine. But policy approval has to be the owner. Has to be the owner. So your dental assistant wants to propose a policy on how to organize the lab, right? Or the sterilization area. Fine. They can write the policy, but then you have to look at it and approve it. Because if you don't do that, then you're going to have all kinds of people writing all kinds of policy. And the problem is you may not agree with any of it. And then you're going to have conflict instead of a smoother running organization. So that's the basic methodology, right? How to be a staff member, how to do a specific job, and then skills you could give them in order to improve on that very job. That's sort of the sequence you would go through with any position in the practice, right? Then there's team training. This is where I mentioned this a few minutes ago. You train everybody at the same time, right? Like, I'll give you a couple examples of what you could do. I talked about like how new patients are handled. You could do sort of a a mock new patient experience so that you can see, maybe what you notice. Let's say, for example, you isolate a problem that your new patient conversion rate isn't as good as it should be, meaning you bring new patients in and very few of them are signing up for whatever treatment plan you're proposing at the end of the visit. And it's falling apart somewhere, right? Well, then you do a little bit of a mock experience. Maybe one of your dental assistants is the new patient, and you walk them through the entire line, right? So they've made their appointment, they show up, and they're acting like the patient. This isn't secret or whatever. The whole staff is watching this, and you'll see where things start to drop off. Like I remember one in particular, and this is when offices weren't as digital, but the new patient would come in, they'd see the doctor. The doctor was going to bring them back for a consultation of some kind. And then the patient would, the treatment plan would be sent up to the front to be entered in the system. It didn't get entered in the system. Nobody estimated insurance. The patient would show up for the consultation and the doctor was all thumbs because they didn't know, what insurance covered, how much this cost. The patient had to wait 10 minutes to get the treatment plan generated. These are the silly little things that you find out when you do things like this. You sort of demo out the line in the practice, and you start to see where there are, things missing or things that you need to add or change on that line. You could also do things like, let's say 5 or 6 people might be answering the phone in your practice, and you want to improve new patient conversion rate. You could have a whole staff meeting where you go over how new patient calls are supposed to be handled, and everybody could role play it for a while. These are the types of things you could do. If there are things you want to improve as a team, you do team training like that where everybody does it at the same time. All right, so that's point number 3. We got point number 1, no one's responsible. Someone has to become responsible, rather. Point number 2, not enough time. Point number 3, what are you training them on? And obviously, look, there's a lot more I could get into with this. Like I mentioned, we have things like DDS Success that you can check out. It's not uncommon for an MGE client to bring a ton of staff to seminars, or at least have maybe they come to the seminar and their staff stream the seminar so that, again, everybody is on the same page. What's point number 4? It has to do with attitude. So, and this is specifically, obviously, if you're making it important, the doctor cannot make it unimportant. The doctor has to think it's important. The office manager has to think it's important. But let's say you do. Training is a big deal in your office. But then you have a particular staff member or team member who just doesn't think it's that big of a deal. They don't want to train. If I'm interviewing a prospective employee, nothing scares me more than somebody who knows it all. Right? You're interviewing somebody, oh yeah, I want to, hire you to handle collections, but oh yeah, I know all about this, I know all about that. Like, in other words, they have nothing they could learn ever. That scares me to death because somebody who thinks they know everything will, one of two things are going to happen. When you point out that they don't know something, they're going to be quote unquote right about how they know it, right? Or they're going to reject that idea and not implement it, right? So if I'm, as part of the hiring process, when we hire, we make sure that someone knows that training is a part of the job and that they actually want to improve their skill sets and learn more. And look, when you're employing someone, the most important thing, if you look at grading criteria for an employee, is performance. Right? It's performance. That's why we talk about statistic management, having a statistic. Well, why do you have a statistic? It's not to, assign numbers to somebody. It's to measure how effectively they are doing their job. Are they actually expanding their area, making their area more efficient, more productive, or is their area declining? Right? So ultimately, performance is the most important thing when we're looking at whether someone's functioning or not. But when it comes to performance, how do you improve performance? You learn new skills. So ideally, I'm going to want somebody who wants to learn new skills. Assuming that those skills are useful, I wouldn't know why somebody wouldn't want to learn. Someone might think it's a drag or it's a problem or this or that, but then maybe this isn't somebody who's going to grow with the practice. And look, I'm not an employment attorney. This is obviously stuff. If you have questions about this, can I make this person train? Should I? These are questions for your employment attorney. But to me, it's sort of part of the agreement when I bring somebody on. It's spelled out of what as an expectation when they're actually brought into the business, and that's important as well. You don't want to bring somebody on and then spring on them. Oh, by the way, we're going to this course. They should know that going to this course might be a part of their job as you move forward. So this is something that I would want to make sure actually is there before I hire somebody. But generally, look, the majority of people are going to want to do this, but that is something that tends to mess up training programs, especially. And what's real funny about this is you might have one person who gives you pushback on doing any type of education. And then what happens is you get the idea that all of your staff feel that way when it's really just that one person. Right? So you have to keep an open mind on these things. You can't let one bad experience, alter your viewpoint going forward or wreck your ability to continue to train your team. Okay. So those are the 4 main points, right? Those are the 4 main points that tend to cause problems with training. That's generally what I would do about them. And like I said, this is something where, something is better than nothing. If you're doing some training, it's better than no training. If you're doing, better training, it's something you can continuously improve upon. And, our best clients, if you look at our best or most productive, most efficient clients, they tend to have a very well-educated and trained team. The last thing I'd mention about this is we live in an era now where, AV recording audio or video is easier than ever. So this is another thing you could do when it comes to creating training materials for your practice. Like, for instance, I'm sure you have some kind of an idea of what the mission statement for your business is, or a way you'd like to at least communicate it to your team. Well, then record it. You can buy a tripod on Amazon that you hook up to your iPhone and record super high quality audio and video. Maybe not the audio so much, but you can get an attachment for the audio, and then you just save it. And this is something that you can play for a new employee. Once you've recorded it once, you don't have to record it again. That's another way to accumulate training materials. Again, make sure you have a centralized place where you're keeping all these training materials, because you don't want to have to spend a half hour finding your recording of your mission statement for this new employee, right? All right. Well, that's about all I have for you this week. I hope that helps. We're about to come upon a new year here. It's getting close. So this is something, if you want to make a resolution for your business, definitely increasing or improving your ability to train new staff or to train the staff that you have is a good one to have, because it'll contribute to your long-term profitability and productivity. If you want to find out more about MGE, you can find us online at mgeonline.com or call us at 800-640-1140. I did put a link for DDS Success if you want to learn more about that as far as training your staff. It's a very easy, efficient way to train them on a lot of the basics that you'd want them to know. Other than that, that's all I have. Have a great week, and we will see you at the next episode.